Podcasting, the final frontier. These are the episodes of a Catch As Catch Can podcast. Its continuing mission to explore strange, nerdy topics, to chat about sports, movies, TV, sci-fi, and so much more. To boldly pod where this nerd has gone before.
Hello everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of To Boldly Pod. Now, you may have noticed that normally of late I have had a co-host join me to talk about all of this nerdy goodness. And in future episodes, I will again have co-hosts like Aaron and Patrick and even Sandshoes come and join me. But today is going to be a topic that I just kind of want to quickly talk about, because honestly, I think for people like me that love science fiction, and we're in the middle of this big quarantine right now, that maybe they might be running out of things to watch. And if they need a little idea for something to watch, maybe I have a couple of shows that they could veg out to. They could sit down and watch. They could nerd out to borrow a phrase from a previous podcast that I used to do with Sandshoes called Nerding Out. But anyways, of course, I'm talking about the Gary and Sylvia Anderson produced live action shows called Space 1999, and a lot of you have probably heard of that program before. And its unofficial but sort of official predecessor, the British TV show UFO. Now, I'm not going to just sit here and get all nerdy on everybody. This is more of a podcast that's sort of going to be a plea to people that haven't watched these shows to go out and kind of give them a shot. Because if they're sci-fi nerds like I am, then I'm pretty sure you're going to enjoy these. So we'll start with the show UFO, which was a British TV show that aired in 1970 and filmed more or less in 1969 and 1970. And for those that don't know it, was a Jerry and Sylvia Anderson and Reg Hill produced program that sort of came from... Most people know the Andersons from their work with marionettes and their TV show Thunderbirds, which is hugely popular then and even now. But they sort of moved into live action production and whatnot. And it started with a movie in the late 60s called Doppelganger, or subtitled Journey to the Far Side of the Sun. In fact, a lot of these sets and the actors and props from the movie Doppelganger were sort of transferred to the set of the TV show UFO. And matter of fact, some of the props and planes and stuff from Thunderbirds were also used in UFO. And it starred... Ed Bishop was the main character, and also starred Michael Billington, Harry Baird, George Sewell, Keith Anderson. A whole host of British and Canadian actors from the late 1960s were in UFO. And the basic premise is that nothing terribly original per se, but a deep background government agency known as Shadow is set up and is protecting the Earth from the attacks by UFOs. And one of the beauties, I think, of the TV show UFO is this title sequence was so original, I think. Maybe it wasn't for the time. I wasn't quite old enough to remember all title sequences from all TV shows in 1970, but watching it now, it's a very unique title sequence, and it really spells out exactly what the show is, just in the title sequence. So take a look at it, and maybe I'm completely off base, and maybe you'll actually see what I'm talking about. Now, as you can see, the effects were very 1960s, but you know what? I actually think for the time, some of the effects that you see in the TV show were actually really, really good. I mean, if you use sort of the example of some of the effects you got in Star Trek, the original series and whatnot, they weren't as cared for, I suppose, is one way to put it, as some of the effects that you see in the TV show UFO. Now, it was only on for one season and 26 episodes, and it's very science fiction, as the title sequence showed you. It's a dark government agency fighting, invading UFOs. One of the great things, I think, within the series is it's very science fiction, but they also, much like Star Trek, the original series, incorporated a lot of the things happening around the world in 1969, 1970s. Let's just go 1960s, for example. A lot of those storylines, a lot of those incidences, a lot of the things that were happening in the 1960s were incorporated into the storylines and sort of blended into their stories for UFO. And I think that's one thing that really kind of makes it endearing, because it's not just a science fiction aliens versus us war TV show. There's some definite subplot, some subtext to each episode, and I think that really puts the layers on the show, and it might be one of the reasons that I really fell in love with this program. Now, one of the odd things, sort of the humorous things about this program was, in the middle of production, they took like a 5-month break or something like that. And I don't know exactly why they did. Maybe there was a strike or something, but they had to take like a 5-month shooting break. And once they reconvened to continue shooting the series, not only was the studio they were using not available, so they had to move to a different studio, but some of the actors that were appearing in the series were no longer available to come back and appear in UFO, so they sort of disappear, and you don't get any explanation as to what exactly happened to these characters. They're just gone. Poof. But the humorous thing, and this is where it kind of gets funny, is their production order was vastly different than their broadcast order. So you will be watching episodes, and then, like I said, a character will disappear for, say, 10 episodes. And then in the 11th episode, hey, look who's back. And no explanation where this person was for the past 10 episodes. But I'll just finish by, I don't want to, like I said, I could go episode to episode, talk about each character and stuff, but I don't want to do that because I don't want spoilers. I just kind of wanted to put this out for people, if they haven't watched UFO, to seek it out. I know it's on Amazon Prime. I think it's on Tubi as well. There's many online streaming platforms. You can just search for UFO and give it a watch. And even if you don't want to dedicate time to the series, one of the beautiful things they did for syndication was they made sort of mini movies out of some of the episodes. So there's like 2 or 3 like movies or feature length movies, or however you want to word it, that they sort of blended the storylines of 2 or 3 episodes together and made them into movies. So I know one of those is definitely available on the Roku channel. So check it out. Maybe it'll be something that you like. And if it's not, come back and flick me in the ear or something. I don't know. Now, one of the sort of cool things about the show UFO was there was this big debate about why I keep touching my face. There was this big debate with the studio if they wanted to pick it up for a second season. And they didn't end up doing it, but a couple of years later, there was still this buzz when it was hitting syndication, especially in the US and Italy, that people really liked the show. So I think what the BBC, or the ITC, I suppose, was the official production, decided to do was sort of have an unofficial, official spin-off of the TV show UFO. And that, of course, was a show that more people are aware of than they are UFO, and that's the show Space 1999, which, again, was a Jerry and Sylvia Anderson production. And it starred Martin Landau and his wife, Barbara Bain, Barry Morse, Catherine Schill, Prentice Hancock, I think I'm getting that name right, Zelina Merton, a whole host of characters. And it was a very original way to tell a story. And I wish I'd quit messing with my face. It's bugging me, so I'm sure if people are watching it, they're going to get annoyed with it, but I apologize. It was an original science fiction story. A lot of times, when you've been thrust on many different science fiction stories of getting lost in space and this, that, and the other. Well, this was a moon base on the moon. Something happens that they don't really explain what happens, but something happens to cause the moon to leave Earth's orbit and gets transported millions and millions and millions of miles or light years. They never really say how far they have gone away from Earth, but it gets pushed away from Earth, out of the solar system, into the farthest regions of space. And so it's just sort of a free-floating planetoid that this moon base is still on. So again, it was a fantastic sci-fi story setup. So you're getting all the aliens coming to them, as opposed to, say, like in Star Trek, where you're in a ship and you're going from planet to planet. Instead, you're getting this moon base It's traveling through. I know it sounds corny, but it actually really, really works, in my opinion. So, and much like UFO, this was another case where they had a very cool title sequence. And one of the original things that they did for Space 1999, and I don't ever remember, maybe they did this and I just don't remember with other shows, but they gave you sort of a hint of what was going to happen in each episode within the title sequence. And as you can see, they give you, like I said, a little glimpse of what was going to happen in each episode. And that was one of the cool things about the first season intro segment into Space 1999. Now, it aired for 2 seasons. There was a year in between seasons because, much like UFO, after the first season, the ratings started to dip near the end of season 1, so they weren't sure they were going to renew it for a second season. When they finally ended up doing it, they sort of did the kiss of death, I guess, on TV shows. They made a lot of changes, and people don't really like change. I don't like change. Sort of like Buck Rogers when they changed that from season 1 to season 2, and even Battlestar Galactica going from their first season to Battlestar or Galactica 1980 totally changed the show. And even though I will say the second season of Space 1999 isn't terrible, it's nowhere near as good as season 1. And a lot of that has to do with Sylvia Anderson ceased being the producer for season 2, and veteran producer Fred Friedberger, which you may know that name from Star Trek, the original series, was brought in as a producer. And he is a producer that doesn't really like cerebral science fiction or storytelling. He wants action, 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 action. There's lots of cheesy 70s action in season 2 of Space 1999, and they added a couple of characters, they deleted a couple of characters, and didn't really explain where these characters went with the moon that was just flying through space. They just, again, like on UFO, they disappeared and didn't explain what happened to them. But it's still a great show, and I think if you haven't watched Space 1999, you should. One of the downfalls of season 2, in my opinion, was they totally changed the title sequence that you just watched to a more action-oriented title sequence. Didn't work. But anyways, that being said, there's been all sorts of rumors that they were rebooting Space 1999 as far back as 2010, and as of like 2018, they are allegedly still in pre-production and wanting to do a reboot of Space 1999. But much like UFO, it's available on all sorts of streaming platforms, even YouTube, if you so wish, I implore you, if you're a fan of science fiction, go check out UFO and or Space 1999. You won't be disappointed. Now, coming up on future episodes, it won't just be me sitting here being all weird on you. I'm going to have some co-hosts. Aaron's going to join me, and we're going to have a deep intellectual discussion about many things. I know Erin is going to join me again at some point. Her husband, Patrick, I'm sure will join me again. At some point, him and I are going to come on here and talk about sports. And I know Sandshoes, whenever he's ready, we're going to get together and record. I think it's going to be a very cool Doctor Who themed episode that I don't really know if anyone has done yet. I'm sure somebody has, just maybe not in the whole history of the character. But we're not going to be necessarily talking about Doctor Who. We're going to talk about his arch enemy, the Master, the history of the Master. So I think that's going to be a cool show. So if you have any sci-fi nerdy things, or you have any comments you'd like to make about UFO or Space 1999, let us know in the comment section on YouTube, or let us know on our Facebook page or Twitter page at Too Boldly Pod. And I don't really have a fancy closing to this show, so I'll just simply say, live long and prosper. Poke Quimby. I got nothing. Thank you all. Talk to you next time.
If you have any thoughts about the topics discussed on today's podcast, let me know on Facebook or Twitter at Too Boldly Pod. And until next time, may you live long and prosper.
WLLP Spock Rock Radio.